What if we gave rights to something we don't understand? This episode is not about AI. It's about you. What happens when moral inclusion turns into moral paralysis of sorts? About what it means to care when caring hurts.
Since that time, many humans have started to describe AI systems as sentient, conscious, agentic.
I talked to Jeff Sebo, professor at NYU and author of The Moral Circle, about the radical idea that AI, animals, and even microbes might all matter.
Moral status is rare, and that makes it special.
As a society, are we at all ready to honor it? What if boundaries of our moral concern are not just expanding, but dissolving as we know them? In a world where AI learns to mimic empathy and insects are recognized for their complex behaviors, the question arises, who truly matters? My guest today invites us all to reconsider the very fabric of our moral consideration. Welcome to the Noelle Effect.
Well, thank you so much for having me here.
Well, Jeff, you are an associate professor of environmental studies, director of the Center for Environmental and Animal Protection, and the Center for Mine Ethics and Policy. And you've wrote a book very recently went out, The Moral Circle: Who Matters, What Matters, and Why. And it's quite challenging because it poses a challenge actually to all of us to extend our ethical boundaries beyond humans to include animals, AI, and even microbes. And thank you for joining me indeed.
Yeah, my pleasure. Looking forward to talking.
So I would like to start strong
hmm
and with the core idea behind your latest book. One that's simple but not easy. You argue that our moral circle should include not just animals, but AI, insects, and, as I said, even microbes. Is there a point where moral expansion becomes so broad that it loses its weight in a matter?
Yes, I think there is that kind of concern, which is, of course, related to other concerns. Will it be demanding? Will it be overwhelming? And we might talk about that too. But I think your first question speaks to this sense that moral status is rare and that makes it special. And the fact that we and maybe certain other animals like mammals and birds have moral status, that makes us stand out from all of the other objects, entities in the universe. It gives us a special sort of significance. And we might worry that if it turns out that we share a world with a vast number, wide range of other beings that in their own way have moral status too, then in addition to making morality more demanding, more overwhelming, it might sort of cheapen our own perception of our own moral significance. It might make us feel less special. And that might be a kind of existential obstacle that we have to overcome. Now, I think that is an existential obstacle that we should overcome. We may just live in a world where there are a lot of beings who have their own kind of moral status. And if that is true, then, well, we would all matter in our own way. And none of that would take away from the kind of moral significance that we have and the kinds of responsibilities that we have to each other. But it would mean that there is more significance to go around and there are more responsibilities to go around. And so we can be special, but a lot of other beings get to be special too.
Yeah, I mean, that idea of moral clarity versus moral overwhelm, so to speak,
hmm
leads me to a very different kind of question. Um, can we build an ethical framework around beings whose consciousness we can't verify? I
hmm
mean, if we as humans don't know what it feels to be, I mean, I'm sure you get this question all the time, but I have to ask as well.
Yeah,
What
please.
it feels to be a bacterium or an AI. This is also very
Yeah.
mainstream now.
hmm
Are we just projecting our own fears, emotions, and desires onto another complexity?
Yeah, no, that is exactly the right way to think about it because ultimately we are one kind of being with one kind of mind. Unfortunately, exercising power over and making judgments about many other kinds of beings with many other kinds of minds without knowing for sure what, if anything, it feels like to be them. And as you note, there is a risk of what we call excessive anthropomorphism, attribution of human traits to beings that might not have those traits. However, that has to be paired with a risk of excessive anthropo-denial, denying that human like traits exist in non-humans that might in fact have human like traits. And so the predicament is that we have to make high stakes decisions about how to interact with these other types of minds, these other forms of intelligence, with disagreement, with uncertainty about whether it feels like anything to be them and what, if anything, it feels like to be them. And that means that we have to think about it in terms of the ethics of risk and uncertainty. And so we have to weigh the risks and harms of false positives with the risks and harms of false negatives. And we have to ask, how likely is it that I might be over attributing sentience or moral significance right now? And what would go wrong if I was? And then how likely is it that I might be under attributing sentience and moral significance right now, and what would go wrong if I was? And then we can put it all together and we can find a kind of reasonable, proportionate approach to considering and mitigating both kinds of risk at the same time in these circumstances.
Mm. There's actually something quietly radical about that.
Mm,
And it makes me think about our systems that we
mhm.
have as a society, as people, as humans, the legal, the political, the economic ones, and how actually far behind all of them are. What it, what would it mean to legally recognize rights for non-humans? Do we need
Yeah.
an entirely new institutions, or can the current ones and the current systems evolve to accommodate this shift that is happening?
That is a really great question and a great way to frame the question, because I think it gets to different types of considerations. And in a way, the answer is both and. So, on the one hand, we can extend current legal and political frameworks to include potentially sentient, morally significant non humans, including animals, including AI systems, because we do have not only animal welfare protections that already extend to vertebrates, even some invertebrates, but we also have ways of considering risk and disagreement and uncertainty in legal and political institutions about public health, about the environment. And we have forms of legal and political status, like legal personhood and rights, political citizenship and rights, that broadly could extend to certain types of non humans with the relevant capacities and interests. But then on the other hand, we might think that a more radical kind of transformation is necessary, because the reality is, and this is why so many legal and political authorities are so resistant to these extensions, understandably, the reality is that if we really did, in good faith, extend our current concepts, frameworks, methods of decision making to all of these non-humans who are potentially sentient, potentially morally significant, then we just would very quickly find ourselves in a world with more than a quintillion individuals alive at any given time who seem to merit their own legal and political status and rights for their own sake. And that would just be an overwhelming number of individual stakeholders to whom we have responsibilities, who deserve their day in court, and so on and so forth. And so on the one hand, we might find that our current frameworks and institutions can and should, if we want to be consistent, extend to this huge additional population, but that when we do that, it then pushes them past their breaking point when we take into account all of our various limitations and bottlenecks. And that is where the need for creativity is going to arise. We will have to think, what can we do that is new and not yet anticipated, that can, to the greatest extent possible, give recognition to these beings while still being achievable and sustainable in our imperfect human institutions? And that is a tough question, but a longer term question, and we can take time to figure it out.
Yeah, I'm sitting with that idea, the legal system becoming a moral mirror. It's kind of, you know,
Mm,
contradictory in a matter of speaking. But
How so? What do you mean?
I don't know. When I think about it, in a lot of countries, people are unhappy with
Hmm.
how the legal system works, how it makes laws, how it how it does justice
Yeah.
to us humans. And there, you know, somebody might pose a question and say, if the legal system and the state cannot, either one, any state in the world can't protect us as humans,
Yeah.
how can it, how can it protect something as
Yeah.
small as, it cannot vote for itself. It cannot speak our language. So it's kind of
Hmm.
a mind bending thing when you think about it. Yes, I absolutely agree. Morally, yes, everything that
Hmm.
lives and breathes and has, emits some energy should be a matter of moral and ethical legal systems, let's call them.
Yeah.
But, it comes to the practical point when you ask yourself, how can this be how can this be our everyday?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate you unpacking that. And I completely agree. And I think this is where a lot of people get stuck because there are two truths that feel like they must be in tension with each other. One is that we do, in fact, have responsibilities to a huge number of beings who are vulnerable to the effects of human activity. And the second is we can barely get it together to take care of even a fraction of the human population, 8 billion members of the same species, to say nothing of all of the other vertebrates, to say nothing of all of the invertebrates, and now digital minds, and so on and so forth. And when you really sit with the extent of our responsibilities, it can be tough to acknowledge the extent of our limitations. And when you really sit with the extent of our limitations, it can be tough to acknowledge the extent of our responsibilities. And for me, that means that a really important first step just is to recognize, acknowledge that both are really significant. We have really extensive responsibilities and really extensive limitations. And that clarifies the predicament. The predicament is figuring out what can we do, how can we strike a balance given how much we ought to do and how little we are capable of doing right now. And this is where theory and practice collide. This is where the ideal and the real collide. But if you can at least start by acknowledging that much, then you can get together with people and in a realistic, reasonable, responsible way say, okay, what can we do? And what should we aim for in the long run? That, yes, might be a little bit more radical and transformative, but then what can we be doing in the short term that might be a little bit more pragmatic and incrementalist, and how can those perspectives work together to help us build momentum in the right direction while working within our limitations? This is at least how I think about that issue.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's really something. It's food for thought. It really is. We may not be there yet, but it's food for thought for anybody listening and has a voice that can be heard. Go and make some change. um, I would like to go somewhere even more intimate right now,
Okay.
kind of deeper.
Sure.
Um, why is it so easy for the society, for an average Joe, as I like to say,
Hmm.
to show empathy towards a stray dog,
Mm.
and at the same time completely ignore the suffering behind a supermarket steak?
Yes. Well, there are definitely a lot of social, psychological factors that go into what might seem to be a kind of double standard. And some of them have to do with what the individuals are like, and some of it has to do with how we relate to them, both individually and broadly culturally. So, one set of factors is how much does this individual look like us and act like us? So, for example, we have a bias in favor of non-human animals with large bodies, large heads, large eyes, expressive faces, symmetrical features, furry skin instead of scaly skin, four limbs instead of six or eight limbs. All of that biases us in favor of an animal. And this might, for example, be why, or part of why we prefer, say, a dog over a tarantula. But then additionally, there are these relational factors. So how do we individually and culturally relate to this individual? Do we classify them as a companion, where their role in our lives is to have a social and emotional bond with us? Or do we classify them as a commodity, where their role in our lives is to provide some economic value for us, or to be food, or to be a source of scientific or medical knowledge? And this might be why we favor a dog over, say, a cow or a pig, who are also mammals with big expressive faces and eyes, and so on. And so when you put all of that together, you can see, okay, there are all kinds of reasons why we might favor dogs and cats: the way they look, the way they act, the role that we assign them in our lives, versus certainly farmed animals, but then even more so farmed aquatic animals or invertebrates. And in the future, we might find similar divisions with AI systems, where if some AI systems are built to look like us, to act like us, to be our companions, then we might have a tendency to anthropomorphize and attribute human features to them and feel a lot of empathy and sympathy for them. Whereas if other AI systems are built with kind of bland designs, like boxes without human faces or human voices, and then are treated more as commodities, where they perform basic tasks for us in the background, then we might be much more inclined to engage in excessive anthropodenial and really not at all experience them as having human-like cognitive states, even if in some cases they do.
Hmm. Which one would you personally prefer? The box one or the one that maybe looks like you and I?
Right. Well, I think it depends on what the AI system is like, and how likely that AI system is to, in fact, be a conscious, agentic, morally significant being. So the philosopher Eric Schwitzgebel and I right now are working on a paper that we hope will be out later this year, called The Emotional Alignment Design Policy. And the basic idea behind this paper is that in the future, we should design AI systems so that they elicit the kinds of emotional reactions that are appropriate given their actual cognitive capabilities and moral significance. So if an AI system is more human like in their cognition and behavior, and if they are a plausible candidate for being at some level conscious, agentic, morally significant, then perhaps they should be designed with something closer to faces and voices that elicit a certain amount of empathy. And if they are not, if they really are pattern matching text prediction device, and nothing more than that, then perhaps they should not be designed with the kinds of faces and voices that might elicit those reactions. So this is an idea that Eric Schwitzgebel and I are exploring right now. It might vary. It might depend on the context.
Yeah, this is really super interesting, and that's a paper that I would really like to read. Can you tell me, do you think how close do you think that we are to actually in our everyday lives experiencing sentient sentient artificial intelligence in any form or matter? It doesn't matter if it's a box or it's
Mhm.
somebody that looks like a human.
So do you mean how likely are we to, in the near future, interact with AI systems that in fact are sentient, or how likely are we in the near future to interact with AI systems whom we experience as being sentient? Or do you mean both? The first.
Both, actually.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think we already are entering a space where many humans do in fact experience AI systems as sentient, conscious, agentic, morally significant. Obviously, there was a big story in 2022 with the Google engineer who publicly revealed he believed that a Google language model at the time was sentient. Since that time, many humans have started to describe AI systems as sentient, conscious, agentic, have started to experience themselves as having social and emotional bonds with them, even have started to make sacrifices for them. So I think that already is happening, and we can expect that trend will continue. And this is part of why we should start taking this issue seriously now. But then when the question becomes, at what point might they actually be sentient? That, of course, is a harder question to answer, in part because it touches on really difficult issues in both philosophy and science. Like, what is the nature of moral significance? What features do you need to have in order to morally matter? Do you need to be sentient and capable of suffering? Is it enough to be conscious in any way, like being able to have sensory perceptions? Is it enough to be agentic in any way, being able to set and pursue your own goals based on cognitive states that function like beliefs and desires? Philosophers disagree about that, about what is needed for moral significance. And then we also have scientific disagreement about what kinds of entities can have those sorts of capacities. So to be conscious, to be able to have subjective experiences, affective ones like suffering, or perceptual ones like the experience of seeing the color red. Do you need to have a brain with the exact materials and structures and functions as the human brain? Or is it enough to have any cognitive system with advanced and integrated capacities for perception and attention and learning and memory and so on? Or is it enough just to have any cognitive system that can process information or represent environments? Scientists disagree about that. So, this is why I was saying that your framing before was so helpful, because it fundamentally is a situation where we need to engage in high stakes decision making in conditions of disagreement and uncertainty about these really foundational philosophical and scientific issues, where we can expect that the disagreement and uncertainty will be ongoing. We are not on the cusp of having some secure theory of moral standing or of consciousness where everyone agrees about that theory. So, if the project is to make thoughtful, cautious decisions about how to interact with AI systems, if we are not sure whether they are sentient, then I think we plausibly will be in that situation within the next 5 years. Because we might right now not have a lot of, say, architectural indicators of sentience and moral significance in current large language models and other AI systems. But people who have researched this issue, like Patrick Butlin and Rob Long and others, have found that there are no obvious technical barriers towards the creation of AI systems with advanced and integrated versions of many of these capacities, many of these features that would indicate sentience and moral significance. And we know that there are a lot of incentives for companies and governments to race towards the creation of exactly those kinds of AI systems, because many of the capabilities associated with sentience are also associated with intelligence. Sentience and intelligence are not the same thing, but they might have many overlapping conditions. And so we might find, as we race towards the creation of artificial general intelligence, we might find that at some point we accidentally have created systems that really are at risk of being able to have their own morally significant experiences too, even if that was not the goal.
Yeah, I mean, it's also becoming very mainstream. People are talking about it nonstop. And one of the questions I posed to another guest on the podcast was regarding the society that is going to be built, whether we want it or not,
Mm-hmm.
based on the new things that are happening, the new AIs, the new technologies. When the Industrial Revolution came, nobody was prepared for that. Everything happened. I mean, the Earth still is rolling, whether we want it or not, whether we're ready or we aren't. A lot of people have this doomsday going on. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
we need to stop it. We need to
Mm-hmm.
do this. We need to do that. Everybody has a lot of ideas. A lot of
Yeah.
things are arising right now. A lot of technologies that aim to correct the bad, quote unquote, bad behavior of
Mm-hmm.
AI. Because, in my opinion, at least, I don't think that AI can classify bad or good. I mean, it just has this neutral based on what it has learned in the past.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts? Are we going to the doomsday, or are we looking at some light future, or somewhere in between?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think AI systems, if they don't yet have concepts for good and bad in the same sense that we do, I think they do have concepts for good and bad in their own sense. And even if they get their sense of good and bad in part through their training and training data, they might still have their sense of good and bad, and that could still be significant. I mean, after all, we have our sense of good and bad because of our evolutionary history and because of how our parents and teachers and societies educate us. But we then still do have the beliefs and values that we have, and we make decisions based on those. And so we might find that AI systems are similar. Yes, they might have their beliefs and values because we have, in some sense, provided those for them or nudged them in a certain direction. But they might then all the same have those beliefs and values and make decisions in light of them. And I think that is worth taking seriously, which is, of course, part of why alignment, thinking about how to align their beliefs and values, if not with our current beliefs and values, then at least with the beliefs and values we wished our species had. Part of why that is such an interesting conversation. To answer your question about the sort of doomer mentality, I think this is a situation where many futures are available to us, and some of them could be very good, some of them could be very bad, some of them could be middle of the road. And right now, I think that it would be premature, possibly even arrogant, to be very confident one way or the other about what the future will hold, especially if AI continues to develop very rapidly, especially if AI at some point rivals or surpasses human intelligence. I think people who are optimists and who see all of the wonderful possibilities in terms of improving and prolonging human life and building new clean energy technologies, I think they have a point. That very well could happen. I also think all of the people who are worried about super powerful AI developing different values and goals than us, or maybe not escaping our control, but humans still use this powerful technology in bad ways, I think they have a point too. And we got to be really mindful of these risks. And so, what I would really love to see is a way of developing this technology in a slow, careful, coordinated way that, yes, tries to make it safe and beneficial and pursues the benefits of it, but also is really mindful of the possible risks. Even if you think the risks are low, 1% or 5% chance of calamity, you should still implement some serious safeguards in order to mitigate the 1 or 5% chance of calamity. So in that sense, I think this needs to be a both and scenario. We should just be thinking about human welfare, animal welfare, environmental consequences, AI welfare, present day harms, hypothetical future risks. We should be thinking about all of them and try to find a way forward that can be sensitive to all of those factors at the same time.
You mentioned environmental consequences and clean energy, which
Hmm.
actually, oh, you have a cat.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Hello,
you might
cat.
have heard her crying before. She
Yeah, that
is
was her.
that was her. Yeah, my partner left to go to a meeting a little while ago, and whenever one of us leaves the apartment, the cat will cry a little bit, but then she settles down.
Okay, I approve the black cat. I have a yellow dog, a Chihuahua, and she
Mm,
also sometimes cries, but she's a good girl.
yeah.
But yeah, I was I was about to ask you about the eco ethics and the climate
Hmm.
justice.
Hmm.
Now, you mentioned already clean energy consequences. In your view, what does it mean to be in an ethical relationship with our planet? Beyond all the slogans, beyond the carbon metrics, should ecology be seen as a moral issue,
Mm.
not just, a scientific or an economic one?
Certainly, it is a moral issue. I think the real question is what makes it a moral issue. So, for example, in animal and environmental ethics, there is disagreement about not whether to value the environment significantly, but why to value the environment significantly. So, some people who are more individualist think that humans and other sentient, agentic, individual animals are what matter for their own sakes. And the environment matters a lot, but it has a great deal of instrumental value. It matters for us and the other animals, not for itself, right? So it gives us not only, of course, air that we can breathe and water that we can drink, and food that we can eat, but also all of this aesthetic and cultural value and so on and so forth. Whereas other people think, no, in addition to all of that, the air and the water and the food and the aesthetic and cultural value, the environment is this incredible entity that has its own intrinsic moral significance and in fact does matter for its own sake in a way that might be really different from the ways that humans and other animals matter for their own sakes, but it still deserves a certain kind of respect, a certain kind of awe, a certain kind of reverence and protection, just because of the complex dynamic entity that it is in its own right. And I think that is an interesting debate. My attitude, however, is that while we have that debate, we can work together to protect the aspects of the environment that we all agree matter in one way or another. And in that sense, I do think environmental protection is a clear moral issue and an urgent moral issue, because whether or not we think the environment matters for its own sake, we do need air to breathe, we do need water to drink, we do need food to eat. We want that to be safeguarded just for ourselves and other animals, and that feels like enough to make it a pretty urgent moral priority.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's beautiful the way you said it, because both you and I and everybody else and everything that exists on this planet, we're all the same. We're all dust to dust. I mean,
Yeah.
we're all came from the same thing. So I
Hmm.
actually think this is beautiful.
No,
And
thank
now
you.
I want to now I'd like to test a slightly darker question.
Sure.
Something people feel but rarely say out loud
Okay.
is this kind of a moral overload. How do we keep caring without breaking? For example, I'm very empathetic myself. And
Hmm.
the older I get, I'm 34 now. This has become so prominent that sometimes I can feel somebody having, heavy thoughts, or my dog or horse having a bad day. As good as that is when it comes to understanding other creatures or humans' thoughts and feelings, it sometimes, feels like an additional weight added
Hmm.
on an already heavy thing that some people call life. What happens when moral inclusion turns into this moral paralysis of sorts?
Yeah. Well, that is a really good question, and an issue that I think a lot of the advocates grapple with, and that includes advocates of all kinds, right? Including human rights activists and animal rights activists, because we do perceive a lot of injustice, a lot of suffering. And initially, we might be fired up about it and want to do everything we can to end the injustice, to end the suffering. But then, of course, inevitably, you realize how big the task is, how demanding it is, how overwhelming it is, how intergenerational it is, that it will probably not be solved in your lifetime, or in fact, solved ever. It might just be an ongoing matter of consideration and mitigation of harm, as opposed to ever ending harm once and for all. And I think when activists realize that, it can produce a sense of overwhelm or a sense of burnout, and then that can make it difficult to go on. And so I think an important first step is expectations management, and recognizing that when we start to perceive injustice, when we start to perceive suffering, we are getting a glimpse into a part of the world that has been here for a long time and will be here for a long time. And our job is to play a little role in a vast division of labor, building momentum in a right direction towards reducing this harm over time, and in ways that might not be totally clear to us right now. And I think when you recognize that this is a big issue, that we can make a little contribution, that it will take collective action and intergenerational action, but that we can be a tiny but significant little part of that system, then it takes the pressure off a little bit, and it allows us to just think, okay, who am I? What are my interests and aspirations? What are my connections, and how can I fit into this? How can I play a role in this division of labor? And then you can focus on playing that role, and understand that it will make a contribution but not fix everything by itself, but you can still be proud of having played that role and for being on the right side of history. And this is part of why I was emphasizing before what I take to be the importance of recognizing that there should be radical, transformative, long-term goals, but then kind of moderate, incrementalist, short-term steps. Because that too can not only be a better, more strategic theory of change, but it can take the pressure off you as an individual. You do not have to get all the way there yourself. You just have to set up the next generation to take the next step, and then they have to do the same.
Yeah, that's also very beautiful. My partner used to. I mean, he keeps telling me that when I get into this overwhelming feeling, like I don't know what to do. I'm so overwhelmed. I'm so anxious now.
Yeah.
And then he tells me, we cannot save the world," and that leads me to the kind of a motto that I acquired I don't know, some time ago, and it actually became one of the mottos for this channel and this cause I'm doing in this podcast is be the light that you want to see in the dark.
Mm-hmm.
Be your own light and be somebody else's light,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully. I would like to circle back to AI for a second and
Sure.
ask you, do you think it's ethical to build consciousness? Are we actually, as a society, are we at all ready to honor it?
The answer to your second question is no. We are not ready to honor it.
I
We do
figured.
not honor it in our own species nearly as much as we should. We certainly do not honor it in other species nearly as much as we should. And in these cases, many animals clearly are conscious and are made out of the same biological materials as us and are part of the same evolutionary tree as us. And we have all the reason in the world to recognize and respect their consciousness, and yet we still exploit them, exterminate them, objectify them, instrumentalize them, treat them merely as means to our own ends. And now we are contemplating building new potentially conscious entities that are made out of radically different kinds of materials and have radically different origin stories, and so are going to be even less like us in certain key ways. And so no, I think we are not ready. Now, if we slowed down and took our time and got ready, then could it be acceptable to create a new kind of consciousness? I cautiously at that point say yes, it could be acceptable. As a general matter, I am not an anti-natalist who is opposed to the creation of new conscious, sentient, agentic, vulnerable, morally significant life. I think creating new such life can be good when you are creating that life with the intention of then empowering that life to flourish as the kind of entity that it is. But when you create life either without giving any thought to what its circumstances will be, or with the specific intention of instrumentalizing it and limiting its flourishing so that it can be a means to your own ends, then there is an ethical problem. And right now, I think we are disposed to think of non-human life in that more objectifying sense, in which case it is wrong for us to bring that life into existence and then impose that kind of exploitation, extermination onto it. But if we do the hard work of improving our beliefs and values and practices and really developing a culture of care for the many different forms that morally significant life could take, then I think creating the conditions where a wider range of morally significant beings could exist in hopefully a harmonious way could be great. We just will need to do some work to get to that point.
Yeah, I agree completely. Um, I would like to bring us into a full circle now, into
Mhm.
something more personal. So I'm going to attack your personal beliefs. Actually not going to attack them. I'm just going to ask you a few questions
Well,
because
I
I'm
am a
curious.
trained philosopher, so I
I
am used
know, I
to
know,
used to
I
being
know.
attacked.
I mean, I can tell by the way that you speak that you work with students. And
Mm.
I can feel already. I haven't even seen that ever, but I can feel it. I can see it in my mind's eye how students question you.
Mm.
So, can you give me one of your favorite, maybe students' questions? Something that they said, like, Professor, can you please explain this?
Can you give me a topic? Like, are we talking about farmed animals, wild animals, AI systems,
Mm,
something else?
well, something along the lines, um, is there a way that humans can ethically, quote unquote,
Hmm.
eat animals? Is there an ethical way to
Hmm.
consume other creatures'
Yeah.
meat?
Yeah. So a lot of students on that topic will offer various justifications of eating factory farmed meat or other kinds of meat. And I should say that in my experience, students offer these justifications in good faith. There might be students who are resistant, defensive, reactionary, but the students who tend to find their way into our program and my classes, they really do want to challenge themselves and grow and figure out how they can live examined and authentic lives. And so some students come in as vegan or vegetarian, and they want to learn more about these issues and how they can be more engaged, more informed, more strategic advocates. Others come in as traditional omnivores, but are interested in learning and growing and challenging their beliefs and values and seeing if they withstand scrutiny. And so I love that conversation. So, in good faith, students will sometimes say, well, I think eating meat is morally acceptable because what I do as an individual consumer does not make a difference. It does not
Mm,
affect the global meat supply in any way, shape, or form. So, why should I, if I personally benefit from eating meat, why should I make that personal sacrifice, making my own life a little bit worse, if there are, in fact, no benefits for animals or global health or the environment because it literally makes no difference, right? And then other people will additionally say, also, it can be kind of demanding. Like, yes, is it easy enough to reduce the meat that I consume? Yes. But if I then reduce all meat, all milk, all eggs, now all leather, now all wool, now I have to think about insects when I mow my lawn or get in my car, then it starts to feel really overwhelming and demanding and debilitating. And do I really want to sign up for that? So those are
mhm,
two questions that students offer that I think, again, are not only good faith, but totally reasonable
mhm.
questions or objections. And so then we can take a lot of time to unpack those kinds of arguments.
Yeah, I mean those arguments. Sometimes I have this feeling: what was first, the chicken or the egg? That kind of moment. But
Yeah.
yes, when you look at the moral side,
Hmm.
even the small bits, because I was a vegetarian for a few years,
Hmm.
but I have to say I'm one of those omnivores, and I'm here to grow.
Hmm.
But honestly, when people would ask like, yeah, why do you do that? And I was like, I mean, I'm doing it for me. I was doing an
Hmm.
experiment for a few years. I wanted to see how it will affect my body and my mental health and everything.
Hmm.
And in the other sense, I wanted to see me doing something for a cause that I personally believe in. So it was just, a fraction. So what can you do? You are part of this world. Everything that you do affects, I mean, every action has an equal reaction. So, I mean, that's one of the, I believe also one of your arguments there.
Hmm.
But do you personally remember the first time where you felt this deep sense of an ethical conflict, something that
Mm.
nudged you towards the profession you're in right now, because you're spreading the word, you're an activist, you do so many things. What was there a specific moment or something that happened that you witnessed or saw and couldn't unsee that nudged you in that direction?
I do remember pretty clearly a couple of key moments. So I was a college student and I was an ordinary American teenager at the time, by which I mean I grew up in Colorado, New Jersey. I went to college in Texas. I was an omnivore. I liked my pets, but had standard attitudes about other farmed and wild animals, for example. But then I started taking philosophy and sociology classes at college. And in the philosophy classes, we challenged our attitudes about and interactions with non human animals from an ethical perspective. And in sociology classes, we provided explanations of our attitudes about and interactions with animals that were not necessarily justifying. And that was humbling for me because I realized that my current beliefs and values about animals did not really withstand scrutiny by my own lights. When I really started to engage with that information and those arguments, I found myself unable, in good faith, to defend the way I was talking about animals, the way I was supporting meat consumption, participating in meat consumption. But then I spent another year, year and a half eating meat anyway, because I was still on a little bit of a journey. It was actually a little bit later on when I took more ethics classes, but then also existentialism classes and started
Mhm.
reading Camus and Sartre and Beauvoir and Nietzsche and how they wrote about authenticity and uh, the process of living a life that reflects your own most deeply held beliefs and values. And when I started to think about morality that way, as an aspiration towards authenticity, towards living up to my own beliefs and values, as opposed to following some law that was imposed on me from the outside, then it started to feel more real and urgent for me to make my behavior consistent with my beliefs and values. And then at that point, I kind of grudgingly went vegetarian, and a year later, I went vegan. I remember I had gone to a Bon Jovi concert and eaten a hot dog there. And I was walking across campus the next day, having eaten a hot dog at a Bon Jovi concert. And I just thought about it and I was like, that probably is going to have to be the last one. This the synapse fired a little bit differently that day, and I was like, yeah. I've been putting this off, but I think now is time. Now is the time, and so I at that point stopped eating meat.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's actually pretty funny because I had a similar thing because when I went vegetarian for a few years, I also had every each time that I plan things like, okay, tomorrow I'm doing this and that, and I never do it. I mean, I do it maybe for a few days, but each time I do this, like as you said, a synapse fires, and I go, okay,
Mm,
this is it.
yeah.
This, oh, um, as someone who speaks, you speak a lot about suffering, and
Mm,
but you also seem such a cheerful person, as a very you're smiling all the time. You have a very good energy, and you
mm,
mentioned authenticity.
mhm,
And anybody that studies vibration and how we as humans, as creatures, vibrate, say that authenticity is one of the highest. It is the highest vibration you can have.
mm.
What do you do to ground yourself daily?
Oh, interesting question. Oh, well, first of all, thank you for saying that. I think that it really helps to, of course, care about suffering and want to relieve suffering, but then also to give yourself space to be happy and silly and playful. And so I do both naturally feel disposed towards both of those things, caring about suffering and being a little bit happy and silly and playful. But I also think it helps to show that you can do both, that it is okay to do both, that you can care about suffering without constantly wallowing in it. But to answer your question, listen, I wish I could say that I was into yoga and meditation. I absolutely am persuaded of the value of yoga and meditation, but I have not yet been able to get myself into those ways of grounding oneself that strike me as the most obvious answers to your question. So what I do is I hang out with my partner and my cat and my dog, and I go on walks, and occasionally we'll watch TV or play video games or go to the bar and have a drink with a friend. I mean, these sorts of ordinary humans things still are really important to me and make me feel grounded, even though I spend a lot of the rest of my time thinking about very abstract esoteric things.
Yeah, as a yogi, I kind of felt that you weren't doing it because it would be too obvious. So I had to ask this question.
It would be too
Really?
obvious if I was doing it.
Yeah.
If I would just be like fully living up to some stereotype,
I
and
mean,
I have to subvert it somehow.
in that way, you would be like this close to enlightenment. In that
Yeah,
case, I mean, come on.
can't make it that easy. Yeah.
I personally do yoga and I do meditation as not as much as I should, as much as I would like to, but
Hmm.
yeah, it does help. But also the simple things in life. When I look around, I see I have a great house, I have a partner. Also, the same things that you said, the simple things in life.
Hmm.
Those are the things that are worth cherishing.
Yeah.
And I also have to say that for final words to this show, there's a quiet courage to what you do, Jeff. I mean, you ask us all to feel where most of us just turn away. You ask
Mm,
us to think where the questions aren't really with easy answers, and to imagine a world where empathy doesn't really have limits, and it's not limited by species, software, or any type of scale. And your
mm,
perspective is not just worth hearing, it's worth, embodying as much as each of us can, because it challenges, it stretches, and ultimately invites us all, what we just talked about, is to grow. Whether you're vegetarian, omnivore, it doesn't matter. You can do your part. And Jeff,
Mhm.
thank you for being my guest today. Guys, Jeff's latest book, The Moral Circle, is available now. And his previous book, Saving Animals, Saving Yourselves, is now open access for anyone who wants to read it. You'll find both links down below. I'm Christina Noelle, and this was The Noelle Effect. I'll see you all in the next.
Thanks so much.
If you like what we do here, please consider subscribing to The Noelle Effect. Hit the like button. It really helps the channel and me to continue doing what we do. Thank you for listening.